Now, every time a note comes in, it's going to change everything. And so now, I have different controls randomizing this versus randomizing that, and it's creating totally different patterns every time. So I'm going to put an arpeggiator on the track and then just drop it here. Set it to eighth note gate at like this long, do random other. And essentially what I'm telling the arpeggiator is every time, you hear one of these notes come through, you have to randomly select one at an eighth note pace. Hey, what's going on, everyone? It's Fluent here, and I just wanted to make a quick video kind of going over chains, racks, drum rack, more specifically this workflow that I've come up with drum rack and trying to make it more of a modular instrument and thinking about it on a higher level than I had before. Prior to making this video and putting out this drum rack, I hadn't really considered all the power that it had for like generating new ideas. So that's really what I want to dive into today, is showing you how you can use it to generate new ideas and try new things. So first of all, we kind of have to go over racks in general and just chains. So that way we can understand what's going on when we open up the main drum rack. So first of all, this is what I call my drum design chain. And basically it just has like some macro knobs of everything that you might want when you were getting started with like a drum sound. So I'll go over what chain select does in a minute, but like if you have an LFO on your chain, you can adjust the amount here, the rate, the type. So like you can do any number of things with this, but like say that's like a waveform, attack decay, pitch, your pitch envelope, tone control, volume, add left space for a little effects, and then user presets. So let me just go ahead and grab a Max for Live device real quick. DS kick, drum synth kick. It's real basic, but it'll get the job done and kind of show you how I want to think about this. So first thing I'll do is I'll go ahead and highlight this chain and hit duplicate. So far, most Ableton users who've been using Ableton for a while probably are totally with me, but just to go over it real fast, over here on the left-hand side of the rack, there's a button that shows and hides different chains. And the way these work is basically audio enters from the left side, passes through each one of these chains that you have lined up right here, and then whatever chain plays, the sum of their audio signal comes out the other end to audio effects or whatever else you have going on at the end. So, what we're trying to do is I'm trying to show you a cool workflow that I've come up with for drums, and how you can macro multiple instruments inside of a single rack in their own individual chains, and then incorporate that into a bigger rack. So here's what we'll do. I'll just go ahead and map the pitch to pitch, drive to, I'll do that to tone, attack to attack, where's decay, decay to decay. And this is a really simple and easy mapping just because like the controls are lined up almost exactly. They really made these super simple to use. You could use any effect or instrument in these chains. So for instance, if I wanted to make a kick and operator, I could just drag and drop it onto this chain and it'll replace the instrument with operator. So as you can already see, we're starting to get pretty crazy with this. Like you can have multiple instruments within one rack, okay? And that's kind of like the premise of this whole idea. So now that we have this lined up, we can just hit this. Let's see. Apologies if that's a little quiet. Let me turn it up slightly. Cool. So, we have that going. And, when you turn these knobs, as you can see, we can change different things about the instrument. And that's all fine and good. And I'm not going to take the time to go ahead and make another operator patch just because operator making drums can kind of be a bit of a rabbit hole. What I'll do is I'll duplicate this chain and show you the next cool thing about this. So I'll name this one kick 1. To make it even easier, let's do like long kick. So it's more of like an 808. And then this one, we'll rename it and it'll just be kick. So if I go over here to the map button and I click on that, it's going to show me all the macros that I have mapped and the path that it's taking, right? So this is long kick, attack. So for this one, we don't really want it to go up to 100% because it might not sound. So we'll change the attack for both of these. And then on the short kick, we probably want the attack to be kind of fast. So we'll keep it between like 0 and 25. The decay for the long kick, we'll do between, say, 25 and 100. And for the short kick, we'll do between 0 and 25. The envelope, that's just talking about like the pitch envelope length. You can leave that 0 to 100 for both. Pitch, leave that, it's fine. Overdrive, that's fine. And volume, we don't want it to go all the way up to 6, so we'll do between like -2 and +2 for both of these. And the reason being is just because we can have space for like a little bit of like randomness in the dynamics, but we don't want it to like be absurdly loud or absurdly quiet in between. So now, just by adjusting these macro values, we more or less have 2 different presets. So if I hit this one, I can hit random. Do it again. But they still sound pretty similar. If you wanted to add more, just like craziness to it, you would just vary these more, add more macros, add more instruments. I left these user slots open for you as a user, so you could macro whatever you want to these. And if you don't want to see them, you can just hit the minus button and hide them. Things really start getting crazy, and how I want to show you how to use this rack is Ableton has this feature that I think goes kind of overlooked a lot, and those are called zones. So with zones, they basically act as filters for which chains or chain gets played throughout your rack, right? So as MIDI information would enter from this left-hand side, it would pass through these chains to determine which one gets played. So if I had notes between C2 and C0, it might play this top one. Like if I were to adjust it like this, it would only play this top one. And if I had it like this, from C0 and above, it would only play this bottom one. Now, we don't really need to fool with that when it comes to sound design for drums, just because we're going to be using a drum rack to more or less do the same thing. Velocity is something that you could use when it comes to customizing drum sounds and making some really cool like layered stuff happen. But for me, I always found this to be a bit problematic just because you can automate and randomize velocities with built-in MIDI tools. And the other reason why is because you would have to, if you wanted to say like get a consistent output of sound, you would have to like volume adjust the velocities in the lower ranges and upper ranges to like some middle point. So that's just like a pain, right? So you want to leave these kind of untouched. And what we really want to look at here is going to be like the chain select feature. So I'll zoom in on this. This works similarly to the other ones, but the main difference is that it'll let you select between 128 different chains, and that's between value 0 and value 127. So how do you do that? You just drag this little blue bar, and anything that intersects with this blue bar is going to play. So I've used this in the rack when it comes to selecting like things like instrument effects and things like that I'll show later. What we want to use it for here is we want to right click on it and hit map to chain select. So now when I drag this knob, it's going to move between the 2 different drum sounds. And then I can highlight both of these chains and do distribute ranges equally. And notice what I did while I was talking. I just dragged them out to be the full length of the possible values. And if you do that for all of them, you can just right click and then hit distribute chains equally. And then it's really simple. It just does it for you and you don't really have to think about it. So now that that's done, we can hit hide. We have both of our chains selected. I'll play it over here. Let's see, let me make a couple of MIDI notes so we have something to go off of. It doesn't really matter what we do. We'll just put some quarter notes down. And you're like, okay, cool, but like, what's the power in that? Well, you can just hit random. And so you get an interesting sound that you like. The other thing that you can do is, I mentioned you have these two effects knobs down here. I mean, you can add any audio effect you want. We'll do a simple one. We'll just do like delay. You can add that to the end of these chains. So I'll put it on the kick. Can't think of too many times I would want to do this, but you know, you could map it to effects 1. And so while that can be fun to like kind of fool around with, what it's really useful for is sculpting these sounds. So you can create an effects chain that more or less processes, compresses, and gets them to a certain point that you want before looking to export them. So you're already in a position here where, you know, just by clicking one button, you can randomize all sorts of stuff and get different sounds every time. So picture the power that you would have if you had, you know, 15, 20, 128 of these different chains in one of these racks. Another thing to show would be like expression control. So what you can do with expression control is you have all these different parameters that will allow you to randomize different things. So the MIDI in velocity, you can map it to whatever knob and set its ranges to adjust accordingly. In this case, though, I really just like to use random. But if you want to go crazy and do stuff like slide, pitch bends, aftertouch, things like that, you could really get pretty performative with these randomized drum racks and do some pretty wild stuff if you have like a push or something like that. But we'll just map it to like all these active knobs. And then without even really thinking, like I've generated like 20 kicks just in that short amount of time. So if I had a resampling channel open, I would be able to record that and then pick the ones I like and start working with them. What I also like about this is that it gives you the amount of control that you want, like per sound. So I could have these at, you know, 10% with this minimum and maximum range, this one at 100 or 50, 60, you know, whatever. Move all these values around, and it's going to give me different outputs every time. Like if I only want short attacks, you do that. Cool. So that's all fine and good, but I probably haven't blown anyone's mind so far. And if I have, then get ready, because okay, so we've gone over the drum design rack. So you know what's going on there. You know that you can add multiple chains and randomize them and have them all macroed and crazy and things like that. But let me talk a little bit about the drum rack that we have and kind of go over how you would use it and how to think about it. So we have each individual MIDI note corresponds to like a different pad on drum rack. That's how they like to visualize it. And you can scroll through and see pretty much the entire audible range is covered here. So that's all fine and good. But the really cool thing is that each one of these pads is treated as a chain inside of the rack. And what's cool about that is that inside of Ableton, each chain can hold endless groups, macros, racks, chains, etc. It goes on and on and on infinitely, or as much as your computer can realistically process. So the idea here is that on each of these pads, you would start filling out, different drum design chains with 5, 10, 8, 15 like sounds. And then you could play the pad and then either have like a very controlled, dialed in preset that you're able to tweak, or if you're like me and you're more into like the generative stuff, you just throw on varying degrees of randomness to different parts of the chain in order to create really, really complex rhythms, beats, and stuff, all while just playing a couple of notes or not. So let me go ahead and just give you a little demonstration of that. So I'll go over how the chain works, like in terms of the entire thing. Now that we understand that each chain goes on each pad, and I'll talk you through it. So we have a master effects section here, and I'll talk about the routing more in a second, but I have it inside of a container, more or less, in a send track. And the reason why is because you can send audio on each chain directly to a send or return. So I decided to use this more like a bus than anything else. And then I just have inside of each of these little groups, this is just regular Ableton dub echo, but I have it macro to the dry wet. This is macro to the echo rate. You can go in and customize them further. This is just the tremolo effect with the wiggle. The other one is the reverb. ISO spread is a more or less like an isolator, and then it spreads stuff across the frequency spectrum and like distorts it in stereo. It's a pretty cool little thing, but it's like vinyl distortion plus an auto pan, I believe. Let me see, show devices. Oh, it's actually just an auto filter, and I'm just mixing the dry wet filters, the dry signal with the wet signal, like in a chain. And I'm using the chain selector trick, which I talked about a little bit earlier. Sweep is just doing the same thing, but it's using an auto filter. This is just a low pass filter, which is clean filter, and then we have a beat repeat for some interesting stuff. So those are just the effects that I wanted to throw on here as like a starting point, and I'll probably tweak these over time and make them better, or add or remove some. But if you hit the plus button, you can see that there's space for some more user effects. You actually have room for 1, 2, 3, 4, like 6 more, which is pretty great. And if you have a MIDI controller that has 8 or 16 knobs, this can be a lot of fun, and you can kind of make it like a SP404 style drum rack. So I would recommend that if you do go ahead and start filling out these user ones or customizing these, that you group your effects into racks, and then you macro the controls you want to have. So that way you can map them directly to one big knob on the end or 2 big knobs on the end. So that way, one, each effect doesn't take up too much precious like macro real estate over here. And then 2, it gives you a lot of control over what's getting changed per effect. So this one that I have for the video, and it just has like a snare, a kick, and a hat. And the reason why I wanted to show this one was because I wanted to show some cool tricks you can do with it. First of all, like if I hit the random button a bunch of times, I'm going to hit some more because I hate that sound. Okay, so let's say I like that snare a lot. I don't want to lose it. I have 2 options. I can either drag it into a new track down here, or I could actually just drag it onto a new pad inside of drum rack, and it'll remove it from the chain and then make it its own dedicated MIDI note. The other thing I could do is, if I wanted to, say, still have control over the macros, because watch this, if I hit control and drag it onto a new pad, it preserves the sound, but you do lose those macro mappings, which you may want. So what you can do is you can take this, and you can actually take this whole rack and hit control and drag it onto a new chain, and then just like delete and mute every other snare in your chain. It goes pretty deep. So like if you wanted a dedicated snare, you're like, oh, that snare's the one, you could pull it out that way. From here, you could right click and hit extract chain, and then you have it in a whole separate track with the master effects that you want, fully macroed, so on and so forth. So you can get really, really wild with pulling stuff out and having a lot of control, while also like maintaining the random elements as well. You're like, okay, this is all cool, but it's like kind of a lot. Why would you go through all this trouble? And the real reason is because I wanted to have options while I was doing sound design for drums. And I realized that it's really fun to be able to add randomness, but sometimes that can be frustrating because you lose progress in some ways because you're acting destructively. So the idea behind this rack was that you would make chains with the drum design chain that's like 8, 10 different presets. You spend some time mapping them and like really customizing them so that each one's different and sounds really good. And then you build up a drum rack here and then go to town with it for like an hour-long session and then delete it. That's one way that you can use it. The other way that you'd be able to use it would be trying to maintain like a master drum rack with all of your settings. The only tricky part about that is that, you know, every time you work in Ableton and you add or subtract or really click anything, you do work destructively. So what you would need to do is you would need to save frequently. And if you do this, I would highly recommend saving like a version history. So you can see that this one is named Modular Drums 1.1, where Modular Drums, the original, is still there. That way, if I make sweeping changes to this one, I can still pull up this one. So that's just something to be aware of before like jumping in fully, is that you can more or less like destroy your own work if you're not careful. So just save frequently and often. And if I were you, I would consider using the drum design chains, saving those independently, and then dragging them in to get started, and then, you know, building from there and saving your rack. Just because when you start adding MIDI information and you start adding the randomness features and the new mappings, it can get really messy. So make sure that before you jump into adding all the crazy stuff, you have like your clean data hygienic rack all like flossed and ready to go. All your knobs are turned to the right place and it looks nice and good. So that way when you reopen it in the next session, it's not just like a terrible mess. So anyway, let's go ahead and make some beats. So that was a long enough exposition to go ahead and click some notes in. Cool, right? So now I have my kick. The attack's way too... Right, so like I have a lot of control here, and if I had multiple chains, I'd be able to swap between my presets really easily. I'd be able to do all kinds of cool stuff, and I can sit here and sound design very carefully the exact drum kit that I would want for a song, and that's awesome. The other thing I can do is like hit random on my effects here. Hold up. When you do that, it kind of jacks with the beat repeat like really hard. Let me, one thing to mention is that if you don't want a certain parameter to get randomized, like the beat repeat rate, you can hit exclude from macro variation and from randomization. So I could exclude from randomization on beat repeat. So it doesn't get too out of hand when I'm doing this. I could also untick the box at any time. We said everything echoed and filtered out. Cool. So, you're able to do cool stuff with that and just randomize the effects, or, map them to your MIDI controller and do fun things with it. Lastly, let me talk about what you can do with randomness in terms of the entire rack. So what I'll do is I'll grab a note expression. I don't think that's what it's called, is it? Expression control. I always call it note expression. So I can take that and I can drop it right here at the beginning of my rack. And we kind of talked about this earlier in the video, but you could just hit random on everything if you want to, or which is what I'm going to do. Or you could, dial it in for exact different parameters for MPE. And you could just map it to like different stuff. So I'll map it to like crush, dub echo amount, and the dub echo amount. I'll do the full range, but I only want it to go between 0 and like 40%. I'll map the ISO spread between we'll do the full range between 19 and 65%, so stuff actually comes through. We'll randomize the wiggle, randomize the reverb. We'll do the full range, but we won't let it go all the way. And we'll randomize, let's see, the filter between 50%, 0 to, we don't want to cut everything, so we'll do like that. So now, every time a note comes in, it's going to change everything. And if you're like, okay, that's too crazy, I mean, that's fine. You can customize it down here, or you could just remove a mapping. So now we're already starting to get into some pretty crazy territory. Now, what if I told you, not only could you do it there, but I could say add an LFO to any of these chains and map it to all of the mappings over here in the macros. So this is sort of throwing my preset to the wind, which is why I wanted to show you that you did have a way to save them and make sure they don't just disappear. But I'll randomize some of these settings, put it on 8th note, and then put it into random. And so now I have different controls randomizing this versus randomizing that, and it's creating totally different patterns every time. But let me turn this off. Turn dub echo off. And I'll have another LFO macroing my snare controls. Do I have 2 snares? I do, so this will be fun. I really like doing this where you have multiple presets because you can map one to the chain select and things start getting really crazy. Cool. And then we'll just do the same thing. We'll put it on random. You could put it to any waveform that you want if you want to create a similar sound every time, or have a sweeping range of sound. Now, let me get rid of this expression control because the filter, where's the filter? Filter's going crazy and kind of blocking off everything that we can actually hear happening. So let me just get rid of this and more or less reset the controls here at the front of the rack. So this is what the drums sound like dry, just with some LFOs put on each one, randomizing all the parameters. you can see here, we're starting to get into some pretty crazy territory. But, you know, if I don't like how long the kicks are, I could set it to like 10 to 30%. Now I just have like regular kick drums. So this is with minimal effects processing and just regular old like MIDI notes playing, right? So let's try something different. We'll leave those LFOs on for the whole time, but let me set this to 8 bars and show you something else you can do. So I'm going to put an arpeggiator on the track and then just drop it here. Set it to 8th note gate at like this long, do random other. And essentially what I'm telling the arpeggiator is every time, you know, you hear one of these notes come through, you have to randomly select one at an 8th note pace. And what's cool about that is that, you know, as I play this, let's say that the kicks were too much for me. I could just take them out. More predictable pattern. So, hopefully you can kind of see where I'm going with this. If you wanted to take things even further, you know, you could just start adding random MIDI effects to different chains and different Max for Live effects to different chains. So, like, you know, you have all kinds of stuff like bouncy notes, chord, envelopes. It really just kind of depends on whatever, you know, material you have here. Scale, if you want to like keep things within certain scales but have the same sort of chaos that's happening go on throughout your chains, you can really do some really sick stuff. So anyway, so that's going to be pretty much it for me. I wanted to show everyone how the modular drums works and everything that you're able to do with it and just how far you're able to push it. I feel like where we are right now in this little demo, I've only just started scratching the surface, because inside of these chains, I only have like one sound playing each, right? And remember, you can map this chain select to select between up to 128 different chains per device. So, you know, things start getting really wild really fast. I just wanted to show you guys in full transparency what this is and how it works. So that way, if you do decide to go ahead and download it, you know what you're getting into before you purchase it. So if you're interested, the link to my Gumroad is going to be down in the description, where you can either join our music production club, or you're able to just download this and sign up for our emails list so you can see anything else that goes live in the future. Thank you again. I hope you enjoyed the video and you learned something, and check you in the next one.